The sky cracked open not with thunder, but with a profound and silent geometry. One moment, it was the familiar, polluted blue over the ruins of what was once Seattle. The next, it was dominated by the impossible angles and serene, mother-of-pearl sheen of an orbital plate. They called themselves the Kthari, and their message, broadcast on every frequency and etched in light upon their vessel, was unambiguous. Children of Terra, the long era ends. We have returned. Your planet, a sacred cradle seeded by our forebears, has suffered under your chaotic stewardship. You are a young, fractious client species, lost without your guardians. We're those guardians. Reclamation commences in one of your solar cycles. Compliance is peace. Panic, of course, ensued. Then came the awe. The Kthari descended not in warships, but in shimmering, city-sized transports that levitated gently above the ravaged landscapes. They were tall, elegant beings with 4 arms and skin like brushed platinum, their faces serene and emotionless. They moved with a grace that defied physics, healing radiation scars with waves of light, purifying oceans with cascades of crystalline nanites, and sculpting breathtaking, living architecture from the very air. To a humanity battered by climate wars, resource collapse, and societal fragmentation, they appeared not as conquerors, but as savior deities. Human governments, what remained of them, assembled. The unified Earth Council, a fragile body more symbolic than powerful, met the Kthari emissary, VL, in the shadow of their vessel above Geneva. VL spoke, his voice a melodic chime in their minds. Your history is a litany of trauma. You poison your nest, war over scraps, and burn your potential in petty conflicts. We shall mend your world. You will be cared for, guided, and taught. Your species will find peace in orderly service to the greater galactic whole. There were protests, defiant speeches about sovereignty and self-determination. VL listened, his head tilted with what seemed like pity. Then he gestured. A hologram depicted Earth, lush and whole. Then it showed humanity's greatest hits: nuclear mushroom clouds, rainforests burning, oceans of plastic, genocide memorials. The silent comparison was devastating. The moral authority of the Kthari was absolute. What could humanity offer but more of the same ruin? But VL, for all his psychic acuity and advanced perception, made his first critical error. He saw the governments, the institutions, the surface of humanity. He did not look into the cracks. He didn't see the scattered network of old bunkers, linked by forgotten internet protocols. He didn't consider the obsolescent orbital junkyards, the graves of humanity's first forays into space. His scanners, tuned for energy signatures and organized militaries, filtered out the low-power, analog whispers of a species that refused to be wholly digitized. In a deep-buried complex in the Swiss Alps, a woman named Alara, former head of the now-defunct Global Historical Archive, watched the surrender ceremony on a cracked monitor. Her field was not physics or war, but context. She noticed something in the Kthari's beautiful, healing light. It was efficient, elegant, and sterile. It left no room for weeds, for unexpected wildflowers, for the messy, chaotic burst of life that was Earth's true biosphere. It created perfect, static gardens. Her message on the darknet was simple. They are gardeners. They see us as a blight. They will prune us next. Few listened. Hope was a powerful narcotic. The Kthari's second action was more telling. They gently, but firmly decommissioned all spaceports, orbital stations, and even high-altitude aircraft. The sky is for the mature, VAL explained. Your forays have been clumsy. We will handle celestial matters. They collected all digital records of human spaceflight, from Gagarin to the last Mars mission, storing them in their pristine archives. A testament to your youthful ambition, they called it. Alara called it a lobotomy. It was in a derelict warehouse in Buenos Aires that the first thread was pulled. A group of aging engineers who had kept a prototype fusion torch drive running as a hobby were visited by Cathari peacekeepers. Their workshop was to be repurposed. The drive, a temperamental, roaring beast of a thing, was to be dissolved into harmless molecules. Old Man Rivera, who had worked on it for 40 years, didn't argue. He simply handed over the central ignition crystal. What the Cathari didn't know, couldn't sense, was that the crystal was a flawed, quartz-based placeholder. The real one, a synthesized diamond matrix, was in Rivera's pocket. The drive was useless without it, and its design lived only in the scarred neuronal pathways of his brain and his hand-drawn schematics, kept in a dusty ledger. The Cathari, who thought in terms of centralized data and perfect materials, had just been fooled by a retired engineer's sentimentality. Similar stories played out globally. In a Tokyo basement, a master of origami and ballistic fold mechanics hid his research on single-use, disposable reentry vehicles in plain sight as beautiful paper art. In the Australian outback, a community that had lived off-grid for a century simply vanished from Cathari sensors, their knowledge of subterranean aquifers and geothermal pockets making them ghosts. The Cathari saw a surrendered world, healing under their grace. They did not see the patient, stubborn, deeply human refusal happening in the shadows. They were pruning a tree, unaware that the roots, old, gnarled, and incredibly deep, were already twisting around their own. The Cathari reclamation entered its integration phase. Cities were reordered into harmonious, efficient patterns. Disease was eradicated. No one went hungry. The air was clean. For billions, it was a golden age of peace and comfort. The price was subtle, but pervasive. Initiative was gently discouraged. Creative arts were channeled into approved, harmonious forms. Historical study focused on humanity's mistakes under Cathari guidance. Children were educated in Cathari principles of cosmic order and species roles. Humanity was being comfortingly, kindly suffocated. VAL presided over it all from the Haven, the Great Orbital Plate. He reviewed reports of 99.998% compliance. The statistical anomalies, minor resource discrepancies, localized communication dropouts, were dismissed as residual chaos from the pre-reclamation era. His focus was on the planet's biosphere, which was responding beautifully to their terraforming. Yet, in his quiet moments, he studied the sealed archives of human history, particularly their conflicts. The scale of their self-inflicted violence was staggering. But so were the contexts. Wars fought not just for resources, but for ideas called freedom or honor, concepts that seemed biologically maladaptive. There was a dissonance he couldn't resolve. On Earth, the silence was not surrender. It was a gathering. Alera's network, now calling itself Context, had become a nervous system for the resistance. They weren't soldiers. They were librarians, engineers, sociologists, and farmers. Their weapon was memory. While the Cathari had archived humanity's digital past, Context was collecting the physical, the analog, the oral. They gathered in hidden places, a decommissioned nuclear missile silo in South Dakota, a labyrinth of catacombs under Rome, a drifting, forgotten oceanic research platform. Their breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a Cathari anthropological field unit. Studying client species integration, they had interviewed a celebrated human artist, Marlowe, whose new works were serene, Cathari-approved landscapes. Pleased with his compliance, they gifted him a harmonizer, a small device meant to soothe turbulent emotions. Marlowe, a former graffiti artist and guerrilla installationist, took it apart. Inside, he found crystalline circuitry unlike anything human. But the power source was familiar, a piezoelectric array. It harvested ambient kinetic energy. Marlowe, remembering the pounding rhythms of the underground clubs of his youth, hooked it up to an old bass speaker. The harmonizer, subjected to a pounding 140 beat per minute drum loop, didn't soothe. It overloaded, emitting a screeching frequency that shattered glass and caused nearby Cathari field workers to clutch their heads in sudden, apparent distress. The data point was transmitted to Context. Cathari neurology was highly sensitive to specific, chaotic sonic vibrations. Their technology, for all its advancement, had a literal Achilles heel. It was too perfectly tuned, too efficient, and vulnerable to being pushed into resonance by the wrong kind of noise. Meanwhile, Old Man Rivera was dying. The Cathari medical drones could have extended his life indefinitely, but he refused them. In his final days, in a hidden barn in the Patagonian foothills, he assembled a dozen young men and women who thought they remembered rockets. He didn't give them a fusion torch. He gave them the principles of explosive decompression, of oxidizer-fuel ratios, of Newton's third law scrawled on a chalkboard. They took the sky, he rasped. The sky was never theirs to take. It's just air and gravity. We beat them before. Go beat them again. He died holding his diamond matrix crystal. His students buried him with it, and the knowledge that a rocket was at its heart a controlled explosion pointing the right way. The Cathari made their first overtly hostile move. A cultural archive in Alexandria, maintained by human historians outside Cathari oversight, was peacefully disseminating pre-reclamation literature, music, and art. VAL, after reviewing samples of unapproved art, a dissonant symphony, a painting of a twisted battlefield, a poem about defiant solitude, decreed a chaos toxin. A peace formation was sent to dissolve the archive. There was no violence. The human archivists stood silently as their servers and books were dissolved into light. But they had already uploaded everything into Context Distributed Network, a network that lived in 1,000 disconnected hard drives, in folk songs passed mouth to ear, in the muscle memory of band dances. That night, across the planet, in hidden pockets, people listened to Jimi Hendrix's screeching guitar, read Allen Ginsberg's Howl, and looked at Picasso's Guernica. The Cathari had given them peace, but these artifacts gave them back a dangerous, essential thing, their own untamed spirit. VAL, sensing a rise in non-harmonic thought patterns, authorized a deeper psychic scan of the population. The scan revealed the faint, scattered echoes of context, but interpreted them as the fading ghosts of a primitive past, not an emerging consensus. He was looking for an army. He found only whispers. He did not understand that to humanity, some whispers were war cries. The incident at the Valles Marineris Memorial Station on Mars was the spark. A Cathari curation team was sanitizing the first human landing site, intending to replace the worn flag and plaque with a monument to galactic reunification. A lone maintenance technician, whose family had worked on the original mission, objected. He was not violent. He simply stood before the lander, his hands on its rusted struts. When the Cathari moved to gently relocate him, global sensor nets picked up his final, shouted words, transmitted via his suit's emergency beacon. "You don't get to erase our footsteps." The Cathari's response was protocol. Minimal force, neural pacification. The man fell into a coma. To VAL, it was a regrettable but necessary action to preserve order. To Context, and to the billions who saw the leaked footage, it was murder. The silent, comfortable peace cracked. For the first time, humanity saw the Guardians not as saviors, but as jailers who would even kill a man for guarding a memory. Alara knew the time for quiet resistance was over. Context activated its cacophony protocol. It wasn't a military plan. It was a cultural ambush. Across Earth, at precisely coordinated times, hidden transmitters broadcast, not jamming signals, but music. Not harmonious Cathari tones, but the raw, distorted, screaming history of human sound. Tibetan throats singing overlaid with thrash metal. Delta blues guitar riffs spliced with the screams of launch vehicle engines. The complex polyrhythms of West African drumming mixed with the staccato bursts of Morse code. It was a sonic weapon built from humanity's soul. The effect on the Cathari was immediate and catastrophic. Their serene neural interfaces, attuned to harmony and order, were assaulted by the violent, unpredictable waveforms. Peace formations stumbled, their coordination shattered. Communications on their networks dissolved into static. On the Haven, VAL felt a physical wave of nausea, a psychic pain akin to looking upon a gaping wound in reality itself. The very air of their perfected cities seemed to vibrate with hostile intent. While the Cathari reeled, the second phase began. From the warehouse in Buenos Aires, Rivera's students, using hand-tool parts and stolen Cathari energy cells, ignited a crude, ugly, beautiful rocket. It wasn't a starship. It was a firework with a payload, 10,000 microsatellites, each a mirrored, dumb reflector. They scattered into low Earth orbit, creating a chaotic cloud of reflected sunlight and radio noise, blinding Cathari sensors in the most critical orbital lanes. From the Tokyo basement, the Origami Master's designs were launched from hundreds of locations. Simple, unpowered gliders made of radar-absorbent materials and memory polymers. They unfolded in the upper atmosphere, floating like silent, jagged leaves, further confusing the sensor picture. VAL, recovering in the Haven's now chaotic command center, stared at the tactical display. It wasn't showing an enemy fleet or a coherent attack pattern. It showed madness. A storm of primitive signals, physical clutter, and resonant noise was disrupting their entire planetary system. He ordered the deployment of the Aegis, swarms of nanodispersants designed to clean orbital debris and neutralize electromagnetic anomalies. They swept through, dissolving the mirrors and gliders efficiently. VAL felt a flicker of reassurance. Humanity had thrown their best, most chaotic punch, and the Cathari were already restoring order. It was what he didn't see that doomed him. The Aegis, in its cleansing sweep, passed through the cloud of particulate matter left by the dissolved human devices. This dust, analyzed by Cathari systems, was registered as inert, harmless carbon and polymer fragments. But it was coded in a compound devised by context chemists, a hyperconductive, atomically fine dust. As the Aegis returned to the Haven's docking bays, it carried this dust with it. The dust settled on everything. On power conduits, on sensor arrays, on the very hull of the majestic orbital plate. On Earth, Elara received the confirmation signal from a forgotten weather satellite that had been hiding in the Lagrange point for decades. She nodded to her team in the Swiss bunker. Phase 3, short circuit. They triggered a single, powerful, and wildly modulated electromagnetic pulse from a dozen retrofitted nuclear power plants, directed not as a weapon, but as a carrier wave. The pulse washed over the Haven. Normally, its shields would have dissipated it effortlessly, but now the entire structure was lightly dusted with a hyperconductive powder. The pulse found 1 billion microscopic pathways. Systems didn't fail catastrophically. They itched. Lights flickered. Doors opened and closed randomly. Gravity, plating, and non-essential sections fluctuated. Environmental controls blared cold air, then hot. It was the galactic equivalent of a spilled drink in a keyboard, magnified to planetary scale. The Haven didn't die. It was subjected to a persistent, undignified, and deeply confusing malfunction. VAL stood on his command platform, watching his perfect creation hiccup and stutter. For the first time, a true, cold emotion broke through his serene demeanor. Not just confusion, but a dawning, terrifying understanding. Humanity hadn't attacked their strength. They had attacked their order. They weaponized chaos itself. And in doing so, they had rendered the Cathari's sublime technology ridiculous. The Haven was not a warship. It was a cathedral of administration, a masterpiece of bioharmonic engineering. It could not comprehend an enemy that fought with grit in the gears and songs that caused headaches. VAL's attempts to reassert control were met with escalating, surreal resistance. His communication arrays, now speckled with conductive dust, began picking up not just the cacophony, but targeted data streams from context. They were broadcasts of human historical events that Cathari had archived as cautionary tales. VAL saw the Battle of Stirling Bridge not as a tactical map, but through the furious eyes of the Scots. He felt the visceral, desperate chaos of the siege of Stalingrad, not as a lesson in waste, but as a testament to a will that preferred freezing ruins to orderly surrender. He was shown the sheer, joyous anarchy of the first Woodstock, the defiant logic of the moon landing performed with less computing power than his datapad, the global, decentralized ingenuity that created the internet from scratch. The archives have been sanitized data. What context sent was the emotion, the context, the bloody, illogical, glorious why. Meanwhile, on Earth, the silent majority was no longer silent. The cacophony had been a signal. People looked at the malfunctioning peace formations, at the flickering Cathari lights, and saw not invincible deities, but confused tourists. A farmer in Kenya used an EMP-shorted drone as a scarecrow. Children in Berlin started playing resonance tag, creating screaming feedback loops by pointing salvage harmonizers at Cathari light poles. The fear was gone, replaced by a burgeoning, irreverent confidence. VAL, in a moment of desperate clarity, ordered a single, precise, kinetic strike to eliminate the primary context node in the Swiss Alps. It was a minimal, surgical use of force, a needle to pop a balloon. The rod of tungsten, dropped from orbit, was flawless. It struck the mountain with pinpoint accuracy. The bunker was vaporized. Alara was not in it. She was in a van 50 kilometers away, monitoring the strike on a handheld radio. The node had been a server farm filled with decades of sports trivia and cooking shows. The real context was now every human with a hidden memory, a forbidden skill, or a sudden idea. The kinetic strike, however, had a side effect that Cathari hadn't considered. It triggered a localized but powerful seismic event. In the ruins of the bunker, under a mountain of rubble, was the one thing the Cathari had never scanned for, because it was inert, useless rock, a natural geode of pure quartz crystal, the size of a bus. The impact shockwave hit the geode with specific, tremendous force. Quartz is piezoelectric. The mountain itself screamed. It emitted a single, pure, and devastatingly amplified harmonic frequency, the exact resonant frequency of the Cathari's primary psychic communion network, which was still dust-compromised. On the Haven, VAL, and every Cathari connected to the network didn't hear a sound. They experienced a conceptual aneurysm. The serene tapestry of their shared consciousness was torn by a white-hot spike of absolute, screaming singularity. It was the voice of the earth itself, not in harmony, but in a primal, focused shriek of NO. Cathari collapsed, neural pathways fried. Systems dependent on psychic control went dead. The great orbital plate, for the first time, was utterly silent, its crew incapacitated. VAL awoke hours later, alone in his mind for the first time in his centuries-long life. The silence was terrifying. He stumbled to a viewport. Below, Earth turned beautiful and scarred. And he finally saw it. Not a garden to be pruned, but a forge. Humanity's violence was the heat. Their art was the hammer. Their chaotic, stubborn love was the anvil. They were not a young species. They were a hardened one. Every war, every disaster, every struggle had not been a mistake to be corrected, but a lesson learned in the only way they knew how, through fire and pain. They didn't build paradise because they were too busy surviving hell, and in that survival, they had become something the orderly Cathari could never fathom. Unbreakable. A communication request chirped. It was an old analog radio frequency. He opened it. Alara's voice, calm and tired, came through. Amisaibal, this is Terra. We have disabled your ship. We have disrupted your systems. We have, I believe, given you a headache. We can keep doing this. We are very, very good at making headaches last for generations. VAL looked at his powerless command center, at his unconscious people. You fight with madness. You damage your own world despite us. We fight with what we have, Alara replied. You took our history as a list of errors. We live it as a manual. Error 404, peace not found. Error 505, compliance not acceptable. You came to reclaim a cradle. You found a nursery full of veterans. Leave. VAL felt the truth of it. They could glass the planet from other ships. They could exterminate humanity. But the cost would be wrestling with a ghost made of grit and song for eternity. To defeat humanity, they would have to become like them, chaotic, relentless, willing to break everything. And that was a victory that was no victory at all. Your reclamation, Alaris said softly, is over. The tenants have decided to keep the place. It's a fixer-upper, we know, but it's ours. VAL gave the order. The Haven, running on backups, began its slow, humiliating withdrawal. The other plates followed. They left behind a healed but messy world, and a species watching them go not with cheers, but with a quiet, weary vigilance. From orbit, VAL took one last look at the blue-green marble. The scanners now, tuned differently, picked up the faint, resilient signals. The ignition of Rivera's student's second rocket, the first notes of a defiant new song in a New York basement, the shared laughter of people under stars they now knew they would reach again, on their own terms. He finally understood the warning buried in the oldest, most fragmented human texts, the one his people had never comprehended. It was not a deity they should have feared. It was the progeny of chaos and hope, the creature that looked into the abyss and learned to make the abyss flinch first. They had come to reclaim a garden. They had fled from Forge. And in the galactic records, VL would inscribe the only conclusion his shattered serenity could muster. Terra is occupied. Do not disturb. The locals are not friendly, and they have a lifetime subscription to trouble.